everyone. I'm Rev Karla. Welcome to Spirituality Matters. Now let's settle in and find that sacred space between here where I am and there where you are. And let us be reminded that the holy transcends our physical bodies, and our time together is just as sacred and meaningful as if we were sitting beside one another. Okay, let's get started. Today's podcast is entitled The Strength and Beauty of a Snowflake, the Hypocrisy in Disparaging Creation. So today's podcast is about finding strength in the toxic words that are hurled at us. And that's not easy, is it? And this really came to me this week when I was actually creating content for a video. And I realized that I was using the phrase, and they call us the snowflakes. And I thought, well, wait a minute, I'm using an insult that is often hurled at people who are bleeding heart liberals, as we're called, because we care about the welfare of others. And we're often on the side of social justice that is seen as offering welfare to able-bodied people, or that we're trying to turn America into a socialist state. That's not true. What we're doing is trying to right the wrongs that have happened in our society, especially things that have happened to historically marginalized groups. So we're using our privilege to make sure that the playing field is equal and there's equity for all. But I found myself saying this and I had to take a pause. I'm like, well, you know, I always thought it was a silly thing that people would say when they'd call you a snowflake. But it got me to thinking how often creation is used as an insult, or as an intended insult towards others. And those who are disparaging creation to try to insult someone else are Christians. So how do you reconcile that? How do you reconcile that you who honor the divine and are called to honor the entirety of creation compare me to something in creation, and that somehow that makes me the weaker of the two of us? So all of this came flooding in, which is usually what happens with me, just a one little phrase or an image or something, and then boom, I know that I'm being invited into a teaching moment. And then right after that, as I was thinking about the content for the blog and the podcast for this week, a memory came flooding back. And don't ask me why, because you can see in the videos that my hair is mostly gray now. And I stopped coloring it by choice several years ago. Not that, women are free to do whatever they want with their hair. People are free to do whatever they want with their hair. But for me, it felt like the right thing to do. My mother has beautiful salt and pepper hair, and I could see that that's the way mine was turning. So I decided to let it go gray. But when I was younger, my hair was a lot darker, just black eyebrows, black hair. And as my body started to change, I went through a time where I had quite a bit of facial hair. It was showing up on my mustache and a little bit on my chin, and it was really awkward. Like just a boost of hormonal energy that was kind of out of whack. And I know this happens to some people, but it doesn't. You don't see it as much if your hair is lighter. But mine was just coal black, and so it was really sticking out. And I had a lot of classmates who would tease me about the hair on my upper lip, and they would call me things like Carla the Frenchman and things like that. But thank God for my aunt, because I was ready to shave it. I was so horrified, and she was like, honey, just don't let those people get to you. Just be patient. It will work itself out. And as you grow, there will be things that you can do. But right now that this isn't the time. And I really believed her, because, and then what happened when I didn't respond to that, those bullies needed to get a rise out of somebody. The part of what a bully's intentions are is to feed off the energy that they get from you. So the fact that I wasn't giving them the energy, they just moved on to somebody else. And that's exactly what happened. And I realized that a bully is just merely deflecting because they too were my age and they were growing awkwardly into a body that was changing and maturing just like mine was. And it did feel weird. And oftentimes you looked out of sync as your arms grew too long or for a body that hadn't caught up or your legs were real lanky. And oh my goodness. And I grew so quickly. I was so taller. Sometimes in between 6th and 10th grade, I was a head taller than a lot of the girls in my school. And I look back now and I would hunker down. I'd say, I have horrible posture that I'm constantly working on. And a lot of that was because I just always tried to make myself smaller and curl into this body instead of being really proud of it, because I always felt so self-conscious about how I was changing. And everybody was noticing that about themselves. And the ones who were doing the bullying, a lot of times had the most issues with how their body was changing. And that bullying, as we know, can scar a person for life. So those who bully, like it's their reason for going to school, and you know who they are. I know we all have memories of those people in our lifetime. They are the ones who are having the most problems accepting them, or they are suffering their own abuse or bullying somewhere in their lives. And they in turn are using bullying as an outlet for the frustrations that they're feeling in their own lives. So a lot of times bullies, people who have been bullied, become bullies. So like I said, the inspiration for this podcast was the video script that I was writing, where I wrote, and they call us snowflakes. And it gave me pause because it did feel awkward that, like I said, I'm using this insult that is often used, and it just doesn't ring true. So I want you to understand why that was important to me to pause and then come here to this podcast to talk about it. Because like I said, the person who is disparaging creation and throwing these insults at other people are often Christians. They're often churched Christians who are saying this. So not only are you're hearing this a lot, but especially as tensions rise, as we move closer to the midterm elections, we're looking at Christians who are entrenched in extremism. Now, why do I say that Christians are extremists? I get this question a lot, like, why are you using that term? And I notice that a lot of people are picking up on it. Because it is the truth. So extremism can be defined in many different ways. And the way that most of us have come to understand an extremist religious thought was what we saw after 9/11. And we saw Islamist extremists that were using weapons to force their religious beliefs on others. We saw what happened on 9/11, and then we saw the subsequent violence and war that happened after that. And so extremist religious people became part of our vocabulary to explain that. So that's an extreme, that's on one side of the spectrum of extremist religious person. But on this side, we're here in America, what's happening right now is the weaponization of laws across states that are using their biblical beliefs to marginalize and oppress people based on their religious beliefs. So on one side of the spectrum, you have people using weapons to create a situation that enforces those beliefs. And over here, we have people weaponizing laws. It's the same. The result is the same. It's extremism. Anytime that you are forcing your beliefs on another person so that they cannot live freely, it is extremism. So that is what we are seeing happening right now. But it is not, people will say that that's insulting, and it isn't. It's just explaining what that when you say an extremist Christian, that's what that is. That's an adjective explaining how people are weaponizing their religious beliefs. I don't use derogatory terms towards humans. I don't attack a person's physical appearance. I don't attack their age. I don't attack their gender. I don't attack their sexual authenticity. I would never do that because of the experience of bullying that I went through, but also what I witnessed. Because I know that what I experienced was just a tip of the iceberg, far, far milder than what historically marginalized people experience all the time, on a daily basis, on a regular basis. Racism and biases and prejudice are alive and well right now with your neighbor across the street, or maybe even sitting in your living room right now. So I'm not trying to center my pain, but I know based on that this is something that happens all the time. People who are even allies will go to insults on physical appearance, age, gender, sexual gender authenticity. And they have to be called out to say, whoa, 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 no, we don't have to go there. We have enough facts here. Let's stay focused on the facts. We're not going to become them. So when I think of that, I think of Michelle Obama when they go low, we go high. There's a barrier on how we respond to people because they are people. It doesn't mean we don't push back, and it doesn't mean we don't call out extremism. It doesn't mean that we try to work together for the good of the whole, so that extremist Christians do not become empowered so that they can continue to oppress us. But we don't do it in ways that are counter to our own moral compass. We must stay above that, so we go high. So I think about also how a lot of times we're indoctrinated into apathy, complacency, about watching other or witnessing the bullying of others. And I know for me, that was true. I think about how dangerous that is, that the energy that it surrounds the act of bullying, because it can escalate very quickly. But also what's dangerous are the people who stand around and witness it and do nothing. And again, this all comes from the same kind of upbringing or indoctrinations, whether it's familial, societal, educational, or religious, that says the person with the most power has the right to inflict that power on someone however they want. And when you're trained in that and you've got this bully acting a certain way, are you going to be silent or will you speak up? So sadly, especially in our, I'm thinking about in grade school and high school, I didn't say enough. I did not do enough, and I regret it. I can't believe that is the same person that's sitting in front of you now. But then you can look back and say, okay, I was indoctrinated to be silent. Here was a kid that was bigger than me, who was not afraid to use physical force to bully others, and I stayed silent. I can think of one time when I didn't, when someone bullied my brother, but I'm not going to tell that story today. I will share it sometime. Somebody remind me and I'll tell it sometime. But it is the same energy when we're growing up. Our upbringing conditions us to remain silent when people cross lines, when they bully, when they disparage another. And social media has made disparaging even more prevalent. I mean, you just see it all the time. Read the comments. They're just toxic. And then you go look at their profile. Jesus is my Lord and Savior, and God is King. And they got crosses all over the place and Bible verses. And it's like, how do you reconcile that you are the same person sitting in the pews on Sunday morning, out here spewing this hate and insulting people the way they look? I had someone insult my hairline. Yeah, I've always had, I have a huge forehead. I mean, I think a lot of what you see in my pictures, I wear bangs because of that. And I guess my hair was parted in a certain way. And they said, yeah, I would be as angry as you if I had that hairline. Can you believe that? And I go look at and this was somebody who was they weren't hiding behind a troll account. They had followers, they had videos, they had content. And right there, John 3:16, and it was okay to disparage me because of my hairline. How do you reconcile? And the fact that that is the way you choose to respond to the content that I had created, which ironically was about hate-filled Christians. So interesting. Like, I just want to go, do you see what you just did for me here? Do you see what this is? And you're going to go back on Sunday and get refueled with the same affirmations that convince you that what you said and how you're showing up in the world is Jesus manifest in 2022 as you. It's fascinating. But I hadn't thought about how patriarchy had helped with some of that indoctrination, but it absolutely does. That's why I encourage people who are deconstructing and decolonizing from their religious heritage that to do it actively, not just leave church and say, okay, that's enough. No. We need to work on actively deconstructing, actively decolonizing, and then we start to become an active ally, because we can look back and see at our indoctrinated biases and prejudices and how that has limited how we show up in the world, but also how we heal. So that is very, very important. Now, in the blog this week, I'm just going to touch on this really quickly. I talk about, I grew up in the 60s, and it's a very different time. And sometimes people will say, oh, Karla, that was a different time, but it sets the stage for how we are in the world now. And just a little bit here about climate change, because we're sitting here in tomorrow is May 1st when I'm recording this podcast. And this has been, once again, one of the coldest springs of my memory. Here in Indiana, when I was a child, my birthday's in the fall, we always had snow on the ground. And we had these massive 1 foot, 2 foot snowfalls. I remember looking out the windows and snow would be at the edge of the window in our ranch home, or cover the screen door, glass screen door where you couldn't get out. We don't have those anymore. We're lucky if we have 1 or 2 snowfalls that hit 6 inches. So things have changed, but I used to anxiously wait and look at it seems like I would look for snow like it was my job. But meanwhile, the 60s also held all the tension as people risked their lives to free themselves from the oppression their ancestors had endured. But that I was far removed from that pain and suffering. The only thing I needed to worry about was when the next snowfall was coming so that I could go out and play with it. That's what I wanted to do, because I was captivated by the beauty and the wonder of the freshly fallen snow. So things are changing, and we know that, but also in the 60s. So here I am worried about when the next snowfall's coming. We have Selma that happened, Selma, Alabama. If you don't know what any of these are, you need to look them up. Happened in 1965. I was 4 years old. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated in 1968. I was 7. Kennedy died and was assassinated in 1963. I was 2. This is not ancient history here, folks. But I also know that in my world that was far removed from that didn't interrupt us to the point where life didn't go on. I was in a small town, white small town, where white was right. And if you don't know what that theology is or that belief, you need to go look at it up. And I'll put a link in the show notes so you can read about it. But it very much is this notion that however white people view the world and how they want to dominate it is the right way to do it. But as I grew and I started to transition away from small town USA, I started to become aware of how drastically different life was for other people. That the people where I had heard jokes told around me, disparaging jokes about Black, Indigenous, and other people of color, about the LGBTQIA plus community, all of a sudden they became human. And that's, then all of a sudden I could not reconcile, once again, like I said, reconcile someone insulting my hairline and then standing and then having John 3:16 in your profile. I couldn't reconcile how I could be a part of a community, being silent with those jokes, those disparaging jokes, and yet being in company with these wonderful humans, and I could not reconcile that this was ever going to be right. So that really is when that intersection of human suffering and my reality started to collide, or I began to see it in a different way. But also, like I said, just like with bullying, part of my indoctrination was to say, turn away from it, not to see it. And I can't go back in my childhood or my teen years and point to times where I willingly turned away, but it just never felt like it was enough that somebody sat down with us and had these amazing conversations to tell us what's happening in other parts of our world. It just didn't happen. It didn't happen in high school. It didn't happen in college. It didn't happen. And it wasn't until years later when I fully deconstructed and decolonized from my educational, my familial, my religious indoctrination that I know that it was time for me to untangle from these bigoted ideologies, that I realized that all of this, even the pace in which I was deconstructing and decolonizing, it was all dripping with white privilege. I had the luxury of taking my time, because if I got distracted by something in my life, in a life crisis, well, I had to put all that on the shelf so I could go tend to my life. So how I got from there to here is that really when I finally decided to leave church, I knew that those intersections could not be denied anymore, that it was time for me to look at all of it, because things needed to fall away while new things arrive. And somewhere along the way, I found my voice so I could become an active ally and work for social justice and equity. So as time went on, I began to find my voice, but I also started to teach online. And my first go at it, I was mostly doing that on Facebook. I would write, and oh my goodness, the white male Christian, who were they offended? And they would attack me. They would send me personal messages. They were constantly calling me every name and demanding me to cite my sources. And what's really, I look back now, what really embarrasses me about that time is how much I acquiesced to their demands. I exhausted myself. I only talked to them so that the people who my message was resonating with, about toxic patriarchy, about healing from religious trauma, they started to fall away because all I was doing was engaging with them. I felt obligated. Now, why is that? Why would I do that? It's because I still had elements of indoctrinated toxic patriarchy inside me. I had internalized that misogyny, where I felt that I had some responsibility to acquiesce to them. So it took another round of deconstructing and healing from that trauma before I was able to go, like, you know what? I'm not talking to them. Now, when I respond to them, I do it in a teaching way, so that those of you who are looking for ways to respond to people, to help find your voice, to understand that they're wrong, that they're dripping with white patriarchy, that they're internalizing misogyny. If it's a person, but especially if it's a woman who says you shouldn't be teaching outside the authority of a man and things like that, it's very important that you see how that has shifted. I'm not talking to change anybody's mind. I'm not going to change a white male Christian's mind about who I am. Now, that doesn't mean that they can't change. I've seen it happen. But my responsibility is not to try to get them to change. That's going to be some kind of life change where something happens in their life that's so powerful and profound that they look at themselves differently. And then they have a huge paradigm shift that invites them to see a different way of viewing the world. And also that could impact the way they show up in their spirituality and everything else, but that's not my responsibility. So going back to this whole snowflake thing, it got, like I said, I could go off on this on a tangent. I already have, but I want to make sure I bring this home, and I've already been going for about 30 minutes here. When I started thinking about the insults about disparaging creation, I'm not going to say some of them, because I do put them in the blog, but stupid old woman has been said to me, you fight, and over the years, you fight like a girl. You're as fragile as a snowflake. You're as weak as a kitten. Don't be a crybaby. Don't be a word that begins with a P. If so it's very clear that if you want to be seen as strong, they want you to grow a pair, because the male power, male authority is more powerful than a woman's anatomy, who all of a sudden now we're insulting the female's anatomy. The ability to create life inside our bodies is somehow a target for insults and weakness and signs of weakness. The mockery of creation is astounding, that this is originating inside people who call themselves Christians. And it is up to us to start to call this kind of toxic commenting and bullying out. Our children need to see us standing up for that. So it's another layer of accountability where we say, especially for those who are allies, don't stoop to their level and call out somebody's sexual gender authenticity, their age, even their body composition, anything like that. We don't do that, but we also don't disparage creation. We don't do that. And I think we need to start finding our words, because the phrases, and I only put a few in the blog, add your own. What do you find so insulting that you will call that person out? They might not like it, but if we turn it back to spirituality, which I think is what we should do, using creation to disparage another human is so undignified and unholy. Using creation to disparage another human is undignified and holy. But yet it happens all the time. And I think that we need to be careful about those of us who are allies, are learning to be active allies and learning to deconstruct and decolonize. That is something that we need to remove from our vocabulary, because if we are lowering ourselves to that, then we have lost the ability to hold on to our place and the point we're making, that we are resorting to something that takes us back into a childlike behavior, and absolutely no good will come from that conversation. Absolutely no good will come from it. So we need to do, I don't know why I cringe, but I got ready to say it as well. We need to do better. I think it's because it's an oversimplification and both sides are saying it. It doesn't have a lot of foundation. But in this, I'm asking you to consider how you use your words. So often, I bet you 10 times, maybe more a week, someone says, I don't know how to say this. I don't know how to say this. And I'm going to tell you, I did not know how to say it. I didn't either, but I practiced. And the first time I said the words, it's almost like I had this out of body experience. Like, is this me? I'm looking down at me saying the words. Now they flood open. I can't imagine not. That hurts my heart and soul if I'm not using them to stand up and be an ally. But I cannot resort to abusive rhetoric. I cannot resort to abusive rhetoric. Now, I am going to go back and look at the words of Jesus, or at least what's attributed in the Bible, because I know there's been a couple things that the brood of vipers and things like that. But we also I think that's a really good point. It's just coming to me. So I'm just going to wing this for a minute. How important, I was just thinking about this today about another video that I want to do, and how important it is that we release the Bible to its place in history. Now, that doesn't mean that the words can't be alive and inspiring, and that we cannot have that connection to Jesus in your sacred way. Whether you're a Christian or not, you can still have that connection to that message. But the way people are holding on us with a stranglehold, as if we have to apply every word and that we have to abide by it, is absolutely ridiculous. And no one is doing it. Everyone is cherry picking. Everyone. That's why it's time to admit that and release it. Holding people accountable who do that as well. I did not plan to say any of that during this podcast, but it sounds like that's a good place to end this and just say that if they go low, we go high. It means we're not resorting to abusive rhetoric, and that we never want to use the same kind of language that a judgmental, hate-filled, toxic Christian extremists use. We are better than that. Blessed be. Okay, beloveds, I am honored to be in this space with you, and I pray you receive something. I know I did, because the teacher teaches what she needs to hear, and I obviously heard something today that resonated deeply with me. And now, beloveds, go in peace and be at peace. Go in love and may you be loved. Go and know that others are on this journey with you, and you are not alone. You are seen and deeply and unconditionally loved just the way you are. Blessings on your week, and I'll see you soon. Bye for now.